So you guys are attending Symptoms and Strategies for Managing Mental Fatigue After a Brain Injury with Jen Dufau. And she is a certified speech language pathologist and certified brain injury specialist. She's an OSU graduate and owner of Dufau Speech Therapy, where she works with individuals of all ages. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Jen. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening, and you can take it away.
All right, thank you so much. So hi, thanks everyone for coming today. Like I said, this is Symptoms and Strategies for Managing Mental Fatigue After Brain Injury. I do have my email on there at the bottom, so obviously if you guys have questions, go ahead and put it in the chat box. But if, at the very end, you realize, oh, I had a question, but I forgot what I wanted to say, and I didn't say it during the presentation, feel free to shoot me an email, or if anyone's watching this recorded, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll try and answer things as best I can. Go ahead and do next slide. So this is just a general outline for what we're going to be talking about today. First, we're going to be talking about, what is mental fatigue? We're going to be talking about what causes mental fatigue after brain injury, some other causes of fatigue that aren't just mental fatigue, some cognitive strategies for managing fatigue, energy conservation strategies, and then how you can monitor fatigue over time and use that to help with fatigue management. Go ahead and do next slide. All right, so what is mental fatigue? So fatigue is a very subjective term and has a lot of different definitions in the research. For this presentation, I'm going to stick with the definition that mental fatigue is difficulty performing mental tasks for a prolonged period of time. And it can also be called cognitive fatigue. It doesn't always have to be present with a cognitive disorder. So that's why I typically like to use the word mental fatigue over cognitive fatigue, but you might see that term used as well. And you can experience mental fatigue during a lot of different tasks, basically any task that uses memory, attention, problem-solving skills, cognitive skills. And there are actually a lot of different tasks that require these mental skills that you might not even think about. So this can even be like doing the dishes, having a conversation, planning out your day, driving. Driving is actually a very cognitively complex task that a lot of people don't think about as that. So some different signs and symptoms. So a lot of people, when they come in and talk to me, they kind of talk about, feeling tired throughout the day, and they sometimes don't really understand why. And it's sometimes hard for them to even realize that they're experiencing mental fatigue. So it's kind of a good idea to understand, what these symptoms are and when you might be experiencing it. So some examples are difficulty concentrating on longer tasks, decreased accuracy of tasks over time. So you might notice that you're starting to make more mistakes on tasks that's usually pretty easy for you. This one's pretty common, a feeling of overwhelm, feeling frustrated or upset when focusing on a task. And you may not even understand why. You might just notice that as you're going through the task, you start feeling really frustrated by it and you feel like you just have to stop. And the last one I have here is kind of this feeling of brain fog. And I feel like now, especially with COVID, I feel like the word brain fog is becoming more commonplace, but it's just kind of this overall feeling of, feeling off and kind of floaty, and like you're not really able to focus and not really present on what you're doing. So that's kind of what things to look out for are. If you want to hit the next slide. So for this one, we want to kind of, know a little bit more about fatigue in general. So I always tell my patients, the body only has so much energy to use throughout the day, and that's for everything it does. And so this is from the basic life-sustaining tasks. So, being able to breathe, sleep, digest your food, deal with medical, any like illnesses or anything, even to higher level cognitive tasks. All of this is going to take energy. So we want to kind of know the difference between mental fatigue and other types of fatigue, because a lot of things take your energy, a lot of things can be fatiguing. So typically in the research, it's kind of divided into two different types of fatigue. So we have what's called peripheral fatigue. Peripheral fatigue is a difficulty with muscles sustaining a specific force or rate. That's kind of the technical term for it. It has to do with the peripheral nervous system. So these are all of the nerves outside of your brain and spinal cord. These are the ones that are going to be innervating your muscles and your sensory system. I kind of describe it as, that feeling of being tired after exercising. So it's that actual physical fatigue from doing a task over a long period of time. And then we have this idea of what's called central fatigue. And this one kind of has a lot of different definitions as well. But it's basically a difficulty sustaining a task that requires self-motivation. And a lot of the research is kind of focusing on that self-motivation piece, is being able to not just, physically do a task, but be able to keep yourself continuing to do the task. Motivate yourself to keep moving, keep doing it. Motivation. This is usually regulated by the central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord. And it can include difficulties with tasks involving physical activity. So now I said with peripheral fatigue, that's usually like physically fatiguing, but I want you to think of that more of like, the muscles getting tired. Physical activity can be, that generalized physical fatigue, like, just after a long day, you just feel exhausted and just want to kind of collapse. But it can also be difficulty with tasks involving attention, which is where that mental fatigue is. So when we're talking about mental fatigue, it kind of falls into that central fatigue, that central nervous system. But there are different types of fatigue that you might experience throughout the day. So it's kind of good to kind of keep that in mind, that just because you're feeling fatigue doesn't mean it's necessarily mental fatigue. A lot of things play into that. And I don't know if you noticed on the outline, but we're going to talk about other things that cause fatigue as well. All right, go ahead and next slide. So what causes mental fatigue after brain injury? So one of the primary ideas behind mental fatigue is this idea of the coping hypothesis, which suggests that mental fatigue comes from an increased effort of the brain to compensate for injury while doing everyday tasks. It's more pronounced when there are deficits in information processing and attention skills. But again, that doesn't necessarily have to be an identifiable cognitive deficit with mental fatigue. Anyone with a brain injury can experience that. And what's unique with brain injuries, and specifically here, we're going to talk about traumatic brain injuries. That's like falls, blows to the head, concussions, car accidents. Most of them result in the brain moving around within the skull. So I'm not sure how many of you guys have kind of heard about brain injury education, but there's a lot of different mechanisms that happen when the brain is injured. One of them is this idea of this coup contra coup, where you hit the head on one side and the brain actually moves within inside the skull and hits on the other side of the skull and the opposite side of the brain. We also can have, this rattling around the brain inside the skull. There's a lot of little fine bones in the skull that the brain can, hit and pull, and the brain can twist and move, just kind of depending on what exactly caused that injury. So this can cause diffuse injury. It can cause damage in a lot of different areas of the brain. And we get this term, diffuse axonal injury, which is when the neurons, specifically the axons, which is the long kind of tail-looking thing on the neuron that's responsible for sending signals down the neuron. It's when those pieces stretch and break, causing widespread damage. So again, if you think about the brain's kind of moving around inside the skull, they'll twist and shear, and that can cause those neurons, the axons, to stretch and break and cause damage in multiple parts of the brain, even beyond where you had the actual hit or injury. This causes damage to the connections between the different brain regions. So not just, you have an injury in that specific spot in those specific skills where the damage is. You actually have difficulty and damage with the connections between the different parts of your brain, the ability for your brain to communicate. The brain will compensate for this by using different pathways within the brain and trying to create new connections. And this is where that term neuroplasticity comes into play, which if you hadn't heard that before, it's basically your brain's ability to adapt and change and learn new things. The two big things I talk about with people is use it or lose it, and use it and improve it. And when we talk about strategies later on, we'll talk about ways to reduce cognitive load of a task while still trying to be able to complete the same tasks to help with this brain adaptation and growth, and hopefully making it more efficient over time, because the more that you do the task, the better it will get, the more you'll be able to improve those skills. Again, hopefully. Next slide. All righty. So, and I promise if any of you guys aren't really, healthcare providers, and this isn't stuff you learn about. I promise that it's going to get more into strategies later. I just feel like it's important to kind of talk about, what's the underlying mechanism of mental fatigue? Why is this happening to you? So I felt like this is a really interesting study. And if anyone's interested in learning more about it, I have the citation down there at the bottom that you can look it up. But I thought that it was just really interesting to kind of highlight, in the research, what we're seeing about what causes this mental fatigue. Why do people experience this after an injury? So there's this 2018 fMRI study, which is functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is basically their ability to do an MRI, but you're able to actually see, the regions of the brain highlighted during activities. You can kind of see what areas of the brain are activated during certain tasks. Very, very cool technology. So it looked at activation of different areas of the brain during attention tasks and people with and without traumatic brain injuries to kind of look at, what they think might be causing mental fatigue or what might be playing into this. And what they found was that the TBI groups, traumatic brain injury group, and the control group had the same accuracy during the attention tasks. And I think that's something that's important to kind of think about there. Because when a lot of people come to me, they always tell me, I'm able to do the same things, I just get really tired. So they had the same accuracy. They were able to do it with the same degree, be able to do it both correctly. But the TBI group showed less brain activation in various regions. Two of the brain injuries that were, particularly interesting to them were what's called the caudate nucleus and the thalamus. They saw that the control group had greater activation of these two regions, but were also able to deactivate the use over time while maintaining the same accuracy. And I'm going to kind of summarize this in a minute if this is kind of a little bit too in the weeds. And what the authors think is that the fatigue in the TBI group may be caused by needing to use all available brain regions at maximum capacity for the duration of the task. They weren't able to deactivate the use of it. So basically, the damage led to a reduced ability to fully activate various brain regions. So the brain now has a new maximum capacity. You now have a new max load that you're able to do to be able to function at the same accuracy, same level before. In order to do a task with that same accuracy, the injured brain has to operate at this maximum capacity for the entire time. And so if you think about that, that'd be pretty fatiguing, right? So if a non-injured brain is able to start a task, adapt, and then deactivate its use, so use less energy over time, it's going to be able to do that task longer. But if an injured brain now has a lower maximum capacity, has to operate that max capacity, and can't adapt over time to deactivate use, it's going to be using a lot more energy for that same task. And that's kind of what the overall idea from this study is. And what I want you to take away from this is that the injured brain is expending more energy to achieve the same accuracy. So again, kind of a little in depth about some interesting research, but I feel like it's kind of good to have that background and kind of understanding of what's going on when we're feeling this fatigue. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. All right, so these next two slides, I'm just going to kind of touch on some of the other things that can cause fatigue. I will say if any of these things are you think might be a concern for you, I definitely recommend reaching out to your doctor to kind of talk about options and learning a little bit more. Like I said, a lot of things can cause fatigue and different types of fatigue. So if you remember, there's that peripheral, central fatigue, physical fatigue, mental fatigue. The first one that I feel like is pretty common is medication side effects or interactions. And I have that little disclaimer on there, do not stop or change any medications without first talking to your doctor. So it is true that medications can have an impact on your fatigue levels. They can have an impact on your cognitive performance, but you definitely want to make sure that before you change anything, you're always talking to your doctor first, because it might be that the benefits are worth the cost of it. So always talk to your doctor first. Next thing I have on there are vitamin deficiencies and anemia. So a lot of different things can cause that. Some specific ones that come to mind is like B vitamin deficiency. So it might not be a bad idea if you aren't already getting yearly physicals, which I recommend, always see your doctor. getting some blood work done with your doctor, kind of looking at those things. Blood sugar levels can also impact fatigue and energy levels. Pain is a big one, especially after a brain injury, for a lot of reasons, whether it's related to what caused the injury or just kind of that generalized neurological pain. That, again, is going to take energy from your body. So I mentioned that a lot of things are taking energy from your body throughout the day, and your body only has so much energy. Pain is one of those things that has to kind of concentrate on that pain and making yourself feel better. That takes energy. Headaches is another one that's very common after brain injury. Seizures, and then this one is pretty important as well, vision changes after brain injury. So a lot of times people can have blurred vision, double vision, visual field cuts, and all of those are going to make it harder to focus, literally focus your eyes, but also focus on the task that you're doing. It can be distracting, it can be very fatiguing. There's actually research showing that just the vision changes alone can make it harder to sustain energy on a task for prolonged period of times. And I wrote down there, if you have vision changes and you've not before, it might be a good idea to get a referral to a neuro-ophthalmologist if there is one in your area, or an optometrist to kind of see what can be done to help correct that. I'm going to go to the next slide. All right, these ones are my favorite ones to talk about. Other causes of fatigue. Stress is a big one. So these are kind of the big ones I talk about with patients, again, outside of cognition that impact your energy levels. So stress really impacts so much in your body. And I think we're seeing more and more about these effects, and kind of hearing about this more in the news, and people are starting to be more aware of this. Stress can have a physiological impact on you. So I kind of have there that if you are experiencing stress, try your best to implement strategies to reduce your daily stress. Some examples I have are mindfulness. If you haven't heard of mindfulness before, it's basically just this technique to use to bring your mind to the current moment, try and help tune out some distractions and stop that worrying about the future or past events. Relaxation techniques, and there are a lot of different types. If you're interested, there are lots like resources for this stuff online. But if you feel like you need some extra help, you can always reach out to professional help and seek counseling. I always tell patients that I feel like you should view stress management as a part of your recovery and as a part of your health plan, because it is that important. So if you're experiencing stress, don't push it aside, because that will impact so much in your life, especially those energy levels. Next one I feel like is a common one for people to think about, which is sleep. If you're sleeping, you aren't going to be well rested. You're not going to have energy throughout the day. So aim to get consistent, high quality sleep at night. You can implement sleep hygiene strategies. And obviously I don't have any on this slide, but that's another thing that I feel like it's pretty easy that you can find on Google. There's a lot of news articles that have been talking about sleep hygiene recently. So you can kind of find some good information about that. And I do have there that you can get a referral to a sleep medicine physician. There are specialists for sleep out there. So if you feel like you're someone that's having difficulty with sleep after brain injury, that might be a good place to go. And just kind of being aware of that as well, that after a brain injury, it is common to have sleep disturbances. So that can be difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, difficulty getting consistent sleep, or even just a difficulty feeling well rested at night. You might get, those 7 hours at night, but you wake up still feeling tired. It could be that you're not getting that deeper REM sleep. So if you're starting to experience any of those symptoms, again, talk to your doctor. Referral to a specialist might be needed. Next one is poor diet. So if you remember on that last slide, I kind of talked about how vitamin deficiencies can impact energy levels and fatigue. So making sure that you're eating a balanced diet, getting all of those micronutrients in that you need. I have the website that we kind of refer patients to is at myplate.gov. It kind of gives some general recommendations of what you should be eating for a balanced diet. And I do have on there, because I still find that some people don't know this, that they don't really recommend the food pyramid anymore. MyPlate is a little bit different. It has a little bit different of a kind of ratio of the different types of foods you should be eating. So if you're still going off the food pyramid, it might be good to check that out. Or you can also consult a registered dietitian. They can give you more personalized information and give you a lot of specific advice for eating a nutritious diet. And last one is one that honestly I kind of implement a lot in my life. And my husband has as well recently. We've seen a big impact with this as well, which is having a sedentary lifestyle. Staying active can help you feel more energized. And it's not just for, it really is for anybody, getting active, getting that rich oxygen, rich blood pumping through your veins, improving cardiovascular health can help a lot. And there's actually been research showing that just walking multiple times a week can improve energy levels after a brain injury. So even specifically for brain injuries, staying active, walking, moving around can help with those energy levels. And again, that doesn't necessarily have to be intense exercise. You don't have to get a gym membership and, be running like half marathons or anything. Just moving throughout the day and just going on a couple walks. And that's another one too, that, if you're concerned about that, talk to your doctor and kind of get a good recommendation of what is a good exercise plan for you. Go on to the next slide. All righty, so this is going to kind of be the meat and potatoes of this webinar. So we kind of talked a lot about, what is mental fatigue, what might cause it, other things to keep in mind. But now that we've kind of talked about all those other things, you kind of know, like, this is what mental fatigue is. Let's talk about what we can do to help manage that. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, that really the overall goal is going to be to reduce the cognitive load of everyday tasks. And what I mean by that is we want to make you more efficient, excuse me, more efficient at doing a task, so it doesn't require as much mental effort and energy to do that task. So if you're using less energy, it's going to be less fatiguing over time. So the first one I have there is to reduce distractions. And I kind of divide these up into two different types. You can have external distractions, which are the things that we typically think about. These are, think of the five senses. These can be noises, it can be visual stimuli. It could be, that you're in an uncomfortable position, you feel something weird on your body, you're wearing like a scratchy sweater and it's drawing your attention to it. Or you're seeing something like very bright and distracting, like a flashing light in your environment. And I will say those ones are actually usually the easiest ones to get rid of. Because really external distractions could all be solved by going to a nice quiet room. A nice quiet room that doesn't have a lot of stuff going on. Internal distractions, I feel like, are a little more difficult. These are things inside your brain that are drawing your attention away from what you're doing. So these can be thoughts, these can be concerns, stressors, things that just kind of keep popping up in your brain. And on the other slide where I was talking about stress management techniques, I feel like a lot of those can be very helpful at reducing those internal distractions as well. So everyone will kind of find things that I feel like work best for them. I am a big advocate for using mindfulness strategies. There's been a lot of research on that to kind of help with reducing those distractions and keeping you a little bit better suited and better focused on the task at hand. So those can kind of help reduce those internal distractions. But really, I feel like just being aware that they're there and drawing your attention to that can be helpful. The next thing I have is to work on one thing at a time. So I feel like a lot of us, we like to pretend like we're really good at multitasking, but something that me and a lot of my colleagues would kind of talk about is we're not actually as good at multitasking as we think. And it can be very beneficial to just work on one thing at a time and avoid that multitasking as much as possible, especially because that's actually going to use a higher type or higher grade of attention called divided attention, or alternating attention, whichever one you kind of want to describe it as, which is basically you're switching your attention back and forth between tasks. That's going to take more energy than just focusing on one task for a prolonged period of time. The other thing I like to point out with that one is thinking about what task you're doing and what is involved with that task. Because sometimes you might think, oh, I'm just doing one task, but it actually has a lot of subcomponents that you're doing at once. A good example might be cooking something. So you might think, oh, I'm just cooking dinner. That's just one task. But you don't realize, oh, you have the pasta going. Oh, you have the sauce going. Oh, you have the meatballs going. Oh, you have your sides going on the other burner. Oh, you have this timer going for this, or oh, you have something in the oven. It's a lot of stuff going on at once. So you want to kind of make sure that whatever task you're doing, You're just focusing on one thing at a time. Try and reduce that multitasking as much as possible. And again, that's going to help reduce that cognitive load, make it so that way you're not expending as much energy to do the same task. And I think I kind of talk a little bit more about ways to help do that on the next slide as well, but I want to talk about this next one, which is implementing routines. This one is a very, very good one for helping to reduce that cognitive load. Basically, you want to try and create daily routines and routines for specific tasks. Try and do those things the same way every single time. What's nice about this is it turns a task that usually would be something you're explicitly thinking about, you're having to tell yourself what you're doing, into something that's more of an automatic task. You're not thinking about it, you're able to do it basically on autopilot. You don't always want to do it on autopilot, but you have that ability to where it's kind of more of just a habit that you're doing. The more that things can be a habit, the less you're having to specifically think about it and focus on it and expend that energy on doing what you're doing. And I sometimes like to describe a personal example for this one for routines. Back when I was in grad school, I had a lot of stuff going on. Again, a lot of cognitive energy being spent throughout the day. And every time I left the apartment, unfortunately, I kept forgetting to lock the door. And that drove my husband mad for obvious reasons. So, learning about cognitive strategies at the time, I started implementing my own routine, because what kept happening is I had so much stuff going on, I kept forgetting to explicitly think about locking the door. And then I get in the car and I start stressing and thinking, oh no, did I lock the door? I can't remember if I did. It would make me more distracted because I was backtracking, trying to think about what I was doing before. So I created a routine where every time I walked outside the door, I turned the key, turned the knob, and pushed it in to feel that physical force back to know that I had locked the door. And I did that every single time until it turned into an automatic task where I just felt myself pushing against that door. And that way too, later, if I was walking away, I could remember, oh yeah, I locked the door because I remember feeling that physical force. So I turned that from a task that I had to explicitly think about into an automatic task. Something that didn't take as much energy. It was just a habit, just a part of my day. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. All right. Next one is staying organized. So I'm going to kind of read through these and then kind of describe them a little bit. So when you're doing a task, you want to make sure that you're staying organized. Again, you want to make things less of an explicit thing to focus on and more of just, autopilot stuff that you can just kind of rely on your tools that you're using. So first thing I have there is to try and get everything that you need for a task ready before you start the task. So if you need any supplies before you start getting into the task, make sure you gather them all together. That way you're not having to think halfway through, oh no, I have to run and get this, or I have to run and get this. Get it all ready before you start. The next thing you can do is break the large tasks into smaller tasks. So when I was talking about the multitasking piece, I mentioned cooking, where you have a lot of different tasks going down. So it might be good to kind of write down each of the steps of what you're going to do. And a lot of times with cooking, that can be pretty easy because you probably are already having a recipe that you're following. Or if not, it might be a good opportunity to write that recipe down. But break it down step by step and kind of be smart with it. The next one says prioritize the task. Think about what needs to be done first in that task, what can be done last. And again, be smart about what you're doing at the same time. So try and make it so you're only doing one task at a time. You're putting it in the right order, and you kind of have it broken down into a list. That way you can just kind of go down your list and you don't have to think about what's going next. You're just following your plan that you've already made. And then the next one is kind of using that on a larger scale. So plan out your day ahead of time. Try and schedule in breaks for yourself. Alternate low and high complexity tasks. So if the task that you're doing that's pretty difficult, maybe try and either plan a break after it or try and do an easier task after it. Don't schedule too much stuff for yourself in one day. Try and break it up. So be smart about not just planning out your day, but planning out your week. so that we can kind of manage those energy levels. And we'll talk a little bit more about that once we get into the energy conservation piece of it. So planning out your day, being organized with what you're doing, have a plan before you start, so that way you can just follow the plan. You don't have to think about it as much. The next one there is to write things down. So I kind of already alluded to this, but making lists can be your best friend. I make lists a lot. I always tell people that I practice when I preach. Making a to-do list can be very helpful. Again, planning out your day ahead of time, put those tasks that need to get done, put them in order, and have a physical list that can either be, a piece of paper that you wrote down on, or it can be on your phone. The next one kind of mentions using your phone. There's, a lot of my patients use the Notes app. I use my Notes app to make my to-do list and then check it off as you go. And that way too, as you're doing a task, you don't have to explicitly be thinking about what am I going to do next. You just know when I'm done with this task, I'm going to look at my list and do the next one. That's less energy that you're spending. Use calendars and planners. And again, those can be paper ones that you can buy. You can do wall calendars, desk calendars, smaller planners, or you can do them on your phone as well. We have a lot of access to technology that can be very helpful with those cognitive skills. And again, even if you don't feel like you need these to be accurate with your tasks, you think that I can still do these okay, still implementing these will just make them expend less energy. So you might not have to rely on a calendar or making lists or planning things ahead of time, but doing so preemptively will make your energy levels more consistent throughout the day, because you aren't spending as much effort to do each thing. I also wrote down using notebooks, and I put Rocketbook in there. That's something actually that my husband recently got for Christmas, and he has been raving about. So if you like using notebooks and you like writing things down, there's more technology out there that kind of makes things more sophisticated. I personally like, paper and pen and keeping all my notebooks everywhere. But I know there's a lot of different examples. Rocketbook's just one of them, where you can write it. If there's a special marker that you use, you write it on the page, you scan a QR code and actually will upload it to your Google Drive, and then you can erase it. So a lot of interesting stuff out there. I think there's actually another webinar that talks about technology and how that can help after brain injury. So that might be worth looking into if that's something you're interested in. And then again, I just have down there using your phone. Setting timers and alarms can also be very helpful to keep yourself on track. So if you're someone that, you kind of estimate how long it takes to do something, or that you need to do something in the future, spending the effort, again, consciously thinking about it may not always be needed. If you could just set a timer and just, rely on the timer and know that you had that set and not think about it as much, that's another way that you kind of save that cognitive energy. And then there's a lot of different apps for memory, organization, and cognitive skills. You can spend some time kind of looking out for those. A lot of people like to share the apps that they use, so it might be useful kind of asking around, see what people find helpful. Go ahead to the next one. All right. My next one is to use incentives. Try and create structure and provide rewards for yourself for completing a task. This will help make it a little bit easier to stay on task, keep you a little bit more motivated. If you remember at the beginning, we talked about how central fatigue, they think that there's that self-motivation component of, giving yourself that energy and motivation to stay on that task. Using incentives can help support that, help make it a little bit easier to motivate yourself to stay on the task and not use so much energy trying to push yourself. This next one is my favorite, self-talk or self-narration. As a speech pathologist, I definitely talk a lot, and I always kind of joke that this one's my favorite because, it makes me seem less crazy when I talk to myself. But it actually is a very, very powerful tool, and I always kind of tell people, if you notice it, or if you watch out for it, you will notice that some people that do really high complex tasks, they'll talk to themselves while they're doing it. It aids in that sustained attention, which is being able to focus on a task for a prolonged period of time. So talk to yourself, talk through what you're doing. Even if it's just, really baby steps things like, all right, I need to go into the kitchen and get a glass of milk, or I'm standing up, I'm walking into the kitchen, I'm opening the fridge, there's the milk, I'm going to pour myself a glass. Saying that, especially if you struggle with attention skills, can help you stay on task, help you remember what you're doing, and help make it a little bit easier to do the task and make yourself a little bit more efficient. This next one is, when I mentioned that neuroplasticity, this is where this one kind of comes into play. So slowly increase the complexity and amount of time you can focus. So I wrote down there, so think of it as building cognitive endurance. So over time, we talk about how we can kind of reduce cognitive load and make those tasks easier. But over time, we kind of want to try and push the envelope as much as possible. You want to kind of encourage that change in your brain to help make those tasks more efficient, make those connections a lot stronger. So start slow, and then when you're able to, and you have that energy, you start noticing you're feeling a little bit more energy, try to increase the complexity of what you're doing and how long you're doing things. That last one I feel like is a very, very important one, which is just to pace yourself and be patient. It takes time. You're not able to do things the same way as you were before, and that's okay. I think it's good to kind of acknowledge that, be patient with yourself, just kind of keep using these skills to get back to what you're doing and try and push yourself moving forward. So being patient, being kind to yourself, that's very, very important. All right, next one. Okay, so these are energy conservation strategies. So this is basically some strategies you can use to help conserve your energy throughout the day. So we talked about ways to kind of make you a bit more efficient when you're doing a task, but these are kind of overall strategies you can use throughout the day. So the first one I kind of wrote is to view your energy levels like a battery. So you will be spending and using energy throughout the day, and you also need to recharge. So again, think of that battery metaphor. Your battery life is not what it used to be. You have to kind of be mindful of that. No one can run on empty, and it is not sustainable to try and do so. You will need to take time to recharge. So you need to kind of plan that out in your day. Easy way to do that is to take breaks throughout the day. I kind of have different examples of some breaks there, which is based off a research article that I have in the references at the end, of just kind of different ways to think of breaks. Because I feel like a lot of people, when they hear breaks, they think, oh, I have to completely stop what I'm doing, or especially people that are working full time, they have a hard time incorporating breaks into their day because they may not be able to based on their schedule. So different things to think about. The first one I had listed there is tiny breaks. So they only last a few seconds long, and you can use when leaving a task is not possible. So if you really just cannot walk away from what you're doing right now, try and think of ways to do those little teeny tiny breaks. Some examples are, looking away from what you're doing for a couple seconds, taking a drink, doing a nice breathing exercise. And actually, I didn't think about that. Breathing exercise is also a good stress reduction activity and relaxation technique. So think of ways that you can kind of pull away from yourself from the task for just a couple seconds. One example that I remember seeing in the article was that someone who was a teacher, she kind of described that when she wanted to take a tiny break, she might ask a student a question and give them a chance to talk, so that way she can kind of take that break. Or if you're in a meeting and maybe you ask someone else a question, or ask someone else to talk for a couple seconds, just so you have that moment where you're not leaving the task, you're still involved, but you just have a minute to kind of breathe. The next one is small breaks. So these are about 2 to 10 minutes long. So it's non-disruptive stop of the task, which means that you have not completely stopped the task. You're still doing it. You're just taking a little bit longer than that tiny break. So example might be, if you're at work, just walking into another room for a minute, grabbing a quick snack, having a short conversation with somebody. You're still able to kind of come back to that task pretty easily, but you're just taking a little bit of time away. That small break. And the next one is the one I feel like people typically think about when taking breaks, which are long breaks. These are longer than 10 minutes, and it's a complete stop of the task. And a lot of times you might need to implement these sometime throughout the day. So this would be an example, like taking your lunch, going outside, having alone time if that feels recharging to you. Or I feel like the one that's pretty common and a favorite for a lot of my patients is taking a nap. So I will say, if you know a little bit about sleep hygiene, you don't want to be taking too many naps throughout the day because that can kind of mess with your circadian rhythm. but sometimes people need to do that to be able to recharge and come back. And the other thing to kind of keep in mind with this is that not everyone is going to be the same. And no one ever is, even people without brain injuries. No one has the same level of energy that they can use throughout the day. Everyone's a little different. So it's just going to take some time getting to know what your kind of, what your energy level is like. What is empty like to you for your battery? What's full charge like for you? How long can you do something? How long do you need to take a break? What types of breaks do you need to incorporate throughout the day? And when we talk about monitoring your fatigue, we'll kind of talk about how you can get to know yourself a little bit better. But just know that what works for you may not work for somebody else. All right, next slide. Okay, so this one, it is called spoon theory. So I will say that this comes from a blog that someone wrote, and I have that cited there at the bottom. So if you're interested, you can go and check that out a little bit more. She has a full story that goes with it. It's pretty interesting. But I think it's kind of cool because I've actually recently, I was scrolling through news articles and I saw one talking about spoon theory. So it's kind of becoming more common. It's basically just a way to conceptualize your energy levels. So you think of one spoon as 1 unit of energy, and you only have so many spoons throughout the day. So it's kind of just a different way to visualize it versus that battery analogy. So basically just some way to kind of not just visualize that you only have so much energy, but kind of be able to break it down into tangible pieces of energy. So there will be tasks that use energy, or tasks that use energy are going to take away from your spoons, and tasks that make you feel replenished are going to give back lost spoons. And notice I say give back lost spoons, because you can't necessarily, you can't hack your energy levels. You can't go beyond your maximum. Your maximum is your maximum. Over time, hopefully you can help build that endurance and get better with that. But just kind of know that how much energy you have is how much you have. And when you hit your limit, you've hit your limit. You want to try and balance your tasks so you don't run out of spoons throughout the day. And you can think about that the same with the battery analogy. You never want to be on empty. You always want to try and have a little bit of reserve left and then take some time to build it back up. So if you're getting low and you realize that you're almost out of spoons, you want to take some time doing things that give you back spoons so you never run out. And again, we'll talk about this when we talk about monitoring your fatigue, but you want to spend time learning about what activities take away your spoons and how many, if you're able to kind of think about it that way, and what activities replenish spoons. So things that might take away spoons might be things like your chores. If you're working your work tasks. For some people, it might be socializing. Some people find that a little bit draining. For some people, exercise can be a bit draining and take away energy. Planning out your day, stress, and like we kind of talked about those other things that can cause fatigue. If you're feeling pain, that can take away energy, that can take away spoons. If you're sick, that can take away spoons. If you didn't sleep well, all of those things can take away that energy. But then you also want to think about things that are going to give back the spoons, give back your energy, help you feel replenished. And again, everyone's a little bit different. Some of those things that I mentioned that take away energy for you might give you energy. So for example, some people socializing makes them feel energized. Sometimes going out with friends or talking to family members or just spending time having a conversation with somebody makes them feel more energized. Taking naps is one. Again, that's a common one, but try not to rely on that one too much. Taking relaxing walks, playing games. Some people, and I have a lot of people, especially early on, or if they have more severe brain injuries, sometimes for them, the only way for them to kind of relax and feel replenished is just kind of sit in a dark, quiet room, just with no stimulation, just kind of relax for a few minutes. Sometimes too much stimulation, too much of those external distractions can be really draining on you. And again, when I mentioned those visual impairments and deficits after a brain injury, those can be very draining. So a lot of times especially if you have like light sensitivity, spending some time just in a little bit like lower light, low stimulation can kind of help you feel a little bit energized, a little bit ready to get back to it. All right, and then go on to the next one. All right, so monitoring your fatigue. I'm just gonna take one last drink real quick. All right, so there's no gold standard for evaluating or diagnosing fatigue. So when we're talking about monitoring your fatigue, a lot of these are going to be using like rating scales and informal ways of kind of, understanding and looking at that. It's kind of important to keep that in mind too, because when you're going through the process of learning about fatigue and trying to do things to help remedy it, a lot of people have a hard time kind of, understanding what it is or being able to quantify it, because it is so subjective. And although we have a lot of research looking into it, there's no real tried and true way of looking into what constitutes fatigue or what constitutes a diagnosis of mental fatigue. Something else that I just realized that I didn't mention when I was talking about stress is psychological disorders. So a lot of times, a lot of our evaluations can be impacted if there's like underlying anxiety or depression, because a lot of those things impact your energy levels. So kind of keeping that in mind too, when we're talking about stress and, and taking care of yourself and how you can help support your energy levels, stuff like that is going to take energy away as well. And again, that's where it kind of gets a little bit difficult into really, evaluating what is fatigue. So everyone's going to be a little bit different, but these are kind of the best ways that I've been using with patients and talking about how they can incorporate this throughout their day to help them kind of, manage it and understand how it impacts them personally throughout the day. Because again, everyone's a little bit different. The first one is to keep a journal. I always tell people, when you feel fatigue, try and keep track of the time of day it happened, what you were doing, how you were feeling. What are symptoms of fatigue that you notice? What are your early signs? This is to kind of help you kind of start to understand, what are the patterns specific to you? Is there a certain time of day where you notice you're always feeling tired? Maybe you're always feeling tired in the middle of the day. And so when you're starting to plan out your day, maybe you don't want to plan difficult tasks for the middle of the day. Maybe you want to do them earlier in the day when you're having a bit more energy. Maybe you're noticing that certain tasks are more draining than others. So when we're talking about those energy conservation strategies, we're saying, some things will take away energy, some things will give you back energy. And it's different for every person. So spend time figuring out what those things specifically are for you, and writing it down in a journal can kind of help you keep track of it and look for those patterns. And again, how you were feeling. So everyone has some different symptoms of what they're feeling when they feel fatigued. And if you can start identifying those early symptoms, that will make it easier for you to adjust and change your day, be flexible. So you can, if you're starting to feel those early signs, you can plan to take a break, and it can be a tiny break. Especially if you're doing a task that's kind of a little bit more difficult, you can try and be proactive and take more tiny breaks throughout the day, rather than having to take one long break at the end of the day. And most people, I feel like, tend to do a lot better when they can do the smaller breaks throughout the day, and they feel like they can go a little bit longer. So start knowing those early signs, that way you can act early and be proactive. And then I also wrote down there to write down the strategies you've tried. What works for you, what doesn't work for you. Oh, sorry. So that way, again, you can kind of monitor that and keep track of that. Know what strategies you like, know what strategies don't work. The next one is to use rating scales. This is just kind of a good way to quantify how fatiguing something is. So again, you can kind of think of it as like the number of spoons, or if you don't want to, you can kind of use that rating scale. So it's from 0 to 10, and use the same rating scale every time so you can compare. 0 is like no fatigue. 10 is you are completely tapped out and you have to stop what you're doing, or maybe you have to go to sleep because you're so fatigued. And keep track of changes. Again, try and see if you can notice those patterns in yourself. Be more aware of what's going on with you. And again, that last one I have down there is to be flexible. A lot of these things are going to be, be patient with yourself, try and be adaptable, and take your time with things. If you're starting to feel fatigued, take a break and move to less complex tasks. It's important to try and be flexible and spend time getting to know yourself a little bit more, because everyone is going to be different and everyone is going to respond differently to strategies. So you have to take that time to get to know it. And then once you have that figured out, you can kind of have a better plan moving forward of what you're going to do, and say, all right, now that I know, this is fatiguing for me at this time of day, I know when I plan out my day, I can do this to make it a little bit easier for me. All right, and then I guess now if you want to go to that next one. So there, just in case if anybody's interested, these are a lot of the research articles that I use to help make this webinar. So if anyone wants to do some additional reading, I have those listed there, or if there's any healthcare providers watching this and kind of want to get some more information and in-depth analysis of some of the stuff, there's some good references there. And I have a little bit of time left now, so if anybody has any questions and wants to go over that, feel free to chime in. Okay, I think I see Amanda has a hand raised. Or is that applause? Might be applause.
Might be applause.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's a quiet bunch.
That's all right. Well, like I said at the beginning, I do have my email on that first slide. So especially to, if you don't want to, talk out loud in a webinar, feel free to send me an email.